All right, part two of this thing. Let's go into the rhetoric part of the ACT. So these are the only ones that you're going to rely on sound for. So here we have diction questions. Let's see if it's letting me write. There you go, diction. So diction, you'll see that they have different like just word choices here. So this one is a common one. Must have heard. The correct spelling is must have, would have, could have, should have. They put this one here because a lot of students text, and in the texting language they say must of, right? So these are just automatically wrong. They're just misspelled. And then over to number 31, this is a really tricky question. It says this brought art out of the elite galleries by catering to the upper class and literally to the public, that catered, while catering, and catered. So they all kind of sound correct. So here we kind of need to look at the word choice that they're using. So you bring art out of the elite galleries by catering to the upper class. That actually doesn't make sense because elite galleries cater to the upper class, so it doesn't bring it out of it. So that's why A doesn't work. And then while doesn't make sense too. It's like two simultaneous actions that aren't related. The best answer here actually would be B, right? Because B, again, we're using the word that. And when we use the word that, we're describing. So elite galleries are galleries that cater to the upper class. That's more of a definition as opposed to like C and D, which is making it sound like two unrelated actions. For this one's a really common one, 52. Understand easier. A lot of people want to choose that, but when you use like easier, better, or more, you need the word than. There's no than here. That's why we can't choose F. So then you would just say easily understood, right? There's no comparison word. And then she denounced big businesses and bank owners who, again, we have a interrupting phrase here, right? She believed. So we stuck in a phrase there. Who created disadvantages? So this one would be A, right? The bank owners who created disadvantages. So he would be the same as who, right? If you could use the word he there, you could use who, or if you can use the word they there, you can use the word who, right? They created disadvantages. Question type number N, N2. I think there was another N earlier. This is transition words. Right, if you have transition words, then you got to check the sentence before. Because center of gravity of paddlers rides low in the water, kayaks are stable boats, not easily capsized. Sometimes I do this thing where I put little charges here. This is a positive statement, right? It's not easily capsized. And then we have whitewater kayakers are at last advised to wear helmets and flotation devices to prevent injury. So we want to prevent injury. That's a kind of a good thing, but injury is a negative thing, right? So it's saying they're stable and you can't capsize, but then you want to prevent injury. Two contrasting phrases, right? So it'd be J, contradictory. Or don't use the word contradict. Nevertheless, is a contrast word. Today, after many birthdays and New Year's days, I now find meaningful the difference I once found confusing. So again, it's a positive statement. There's different points to, this one's correct, there's different points to significant underlying cultural values. That's another positive-ish statement, right? So then we wouldn't use though, we wouldn't use otherwise, and then is kind of used for like time, right? So here we're using in fact because we're just trying to reiterate something. We're reinforcing, reiterating something. Then here we have a bunch of subordinating conjunctions that we talked about previously. So since, while, although, unless, they all create dependent clauses. Since there's not much chance a 7-year-old just learning the game can hit a pitched baseball, the umpire puts the ball on top of a stationary tee. So it would be F. Since is here like, since is being used like the word because. And then here's an interesting little trick. So we have transition words being tested here, right? And then notice how there's one without. So there is a 90, let's say 98 or 99% chance that it is the one without. I've just noticed that because most of the time there's not a clear connection between the two sentences. It just goes better without a transition word. So families of words to consider. So you might have words that are adding, right? So those would be like additionally, also, in fact, indeed. You could also add examples, right? For example, you could also have contrast words. So be careful between the difference between the word contrast and contradict. Very rarely do we contradict on the SAT or ACT. So contrast is like however, regardless, nevertheless, though. Then the third one would be cause and effect. So cause and effect would be like therefore or thus. It could be accordingly, consequently, right? The first thing would be the reason for the second thing. So I usually stick because in front of the first sentence. Because I am tired, I went to bed early. I am tired, therefore I went to bed early. And then we have for, which is just time words, right? So first, second, last, then. And then weird words. So weird words would be like that is. We use that is if we're trying to clarify or define something, right? So for example, I have a canis lupus at home. I used a really weird word, right? So then I say that is, I have a puppy at home, right? So I'm just redefining or restating that. You could also see of course, right? Of course is used to say that something's obvious. Of course he knew that. But of course could also be used for something called a concession, right? Of course there are people out there who believe that ice cream is tasty. However, I don't agree, right? So you're setting up some sort of argument there. Okay. O is for modifiers. This one's probably the hardest one for students to see, but they're really easy to spot actually. So here you're just putting words in different positions, right? And in English grammar, you want to put the modifier directly before or directly after the word that is being modified. So we're trying to move through the water, right? What is going through the water? Well, one end through the water pulls one end. It's one end of the paddle, right? This whole phrase should go together. One end of the paddle through the water. So we put it right after paddle. So here's another example of where we have a bunch of prepositional phrases in a row, right? And there's no commas. So sometimes you can look around the test for context clues on how you should be punctuating things. Number 6 is a really common example. We have a bunch of rearranged words. They're all the same words, just in different order, right? So it says cheek to cheek, the dance is performed. This one's making it sound like the dance has cheeks, so it's not that one. Couples dance cheek to the relaxed two-step tempo. This one works, right? Because the couples are the ones that have the cheeks and they're dancing that way. A relaxed two-step tempo, the couples. So this is making it sound like the couples are a tempo, which is illogical. And then cheek to cheek, the two-step tempo. So you just always want to think, what is clearly the subject of the sentence? And most of the time you can figure it out then. 68 is another common one. Look at this. It says Bernays suggested, a survey suggested, Bernays' suggested survey. So here the subject would be survey, right? And then here's they. Don't like they if it's ambiguous, right? So if we look at this sentence, it says instead of recommending that bacon be advertised directly, we're missing the subject here, right? So who was doing this possible recommending? It would have been the guy, Bernays. Here's another one, finally approaching Brooklyn. The city's low, quiet architecture. So the subject of the sentence is low, quiet architecture. So here again, we have the ing phrase, which is not a complete sentence. So we have a dangling modifier here. The way it is makes it sound like the architecture is approaching Brooklyn. That doesn't work. Same with H, actually, finally to approach Brooklyn. That still makes it sound like the architecture. Same with J. They all make it sound like it was the architecture. So then the correct answer would be G. It puts in a subject here to clarify who or what is approaching the architecture. And then just for kicks and giggles, right? The city's low and quiet architecture. The city is possessive, and then we have low and quiet, or the city's quiet, low architecture, right? You have the interchangeable adjectives there, or the coordinating adjectives. P. P is the most common one that students miss. It's the concision one. You could also call it wordiness or redundancy. Most of the time, if you see 3 long ones and 1 short one, it's most likely the shortest one, right? could also be the second shortest one. So this one, the shortest one is true maybe like, let's say 80% of the time, right? There's still 20% of the time you need to be careful. Specifically with one with the word delete in it, that's where you need to be the most careful. I feel like delete is true 50-50. Okay. Today, there are more than 400. If we delete it, literally, it doesn't make sense, right? Today, there are more than 400 potters around. Around is kind of vague, right? We have to balance concision with specificity. We don't want to put in vague words like things or around or in places or stuff, right? We want to add clarity. And so the most specific one here would actually be C. It's not super wordy, right? 4 extra words doesn't do a bad thing. And then just to reiterate, right, we have a independent clause here. Today there are more than 400 potters in Mata Ortiz. Independent clause, right? So then we need all of which or all of whom or all of who, right? We need a dependent clause. All of them would create an independent clause. And then remember that he or they would be replaceable with who. And then if we have him or them, then we can replace that with whom, right? All of whom. This would be G. Okay, Q is when you have instructions, right? So they're going to give you instructions. Please do not ignore your instructions. So think about which ones can I choose that are most specific and which ones can I choose that are most relevant, right? We want answer choices that are specific and relevant. This one says we want to maintain the essay's positive tone and mimic the elaborate style of decor. Which one does that? This one would be B. A lot of students will want to choose D because they're like, oh, I need a short answer, but that's not what they're asking here, right? They're asking for a positive tone. And then C would be a negative tone, right? Marred, that means like stained or something. Then here, I don't know why students miss this one, but if we want to dramatically emphasize the ruggedness of the landscape, we would choose shattered. Okay, so shattered versus smothered, right? Smothered is like, meh, it doesn't sound as rugged. So there, just make sure you pay attention to the directions. And then finally, we get to the last question, right? Either the summary or the last sentence. So on summary or last sentence questions, you always want to make sure you go back to the title of the essay, and you always want to check the thesis statement too. Sometimes just doing that alone will allow you to answer the question. Without doing that, then sometimes students still get it wrong. One of the reasons students get it wrong is they focus on something super specific, right? They want an overall goal of the passage. Also pay attention to certain things in the question, like explain how a building in particular, right? I've seen on the test where the question's asking about a building in particular, but then the passage is talking about a bunch of buildings in particular. Right? So maybe they mentioned this building in one paragraph, but that wasn't the purpose of the whole essay. So please pay attention to that. And then suppose the writer's goal had been to summarize women's contribution, right? Again, this is focusing on multiple women. Maybe this essay focused on just one woman, right? So then we need to clarify for that. And let's see if I can actually remember these ones. I think this was a specific building. So then if you look at F doesn't even make sense, right? Styles, a building, so F doesn't even work logically. And I think the correct answer here was G because it did focus on this particular building. And then it could have been J had it been multiple buildings there. And then this one was about one person. And I think the title of the essay literally had the name of the person in the title. So just by looking at the title alone, we could figure out that, it should be no though. Oh, this is tricky because it wasn't about women's contribution, it was about a woman's concentration. So it would have been D. So A is there as your trap answer. And then another one here would be like, okay, we're concluding the sentence, right? So if you can look back to the paragraph itself. You could look back to the title of the essay. I think the title of this essay was about ecotourism. And then, so which one is mostly about ecotourism? It'd be A, even as the number of tourists grows. And this was talking about the positive impacts of ecotourism too. So then you want to keep the tone of the essay positive, right? That's positive right there. What are some distractors here? Other ways of traveling, right? Why would you talk about other things at the end of an essay? And then D, even though some people don't enjoy activities, right? Why would you switch to a negative tone at the end of the essay? Same with B too. You could end an essay with B, but it also switches the tone there. So please keep that in mind. So hopefully this helps.